I mean, look, I don't just get off on hating on people. Herman Cain is a slick corporate salesman. And everybody's like, wow, he knows how to run private business. Let's get him in there. Well, he knows how to run the Federal Reserve. We need to get rid of the Federal Reserve that we didn't have until 1913, 97 years ago. We need to get rid of it. We don't need a former Federal Reserve head of their second most powerful branch in control.
Some people say that we ought to audit the Federal Reserve. Here's what I do know. The Federal Reserve already has so many internal audits, it's ridiculous. I don't know why people think we're going to learn this great amount of information by auditing the Federal Reserve. I think a lot of people are calling for this audit of the Federal Reserve because they don't know enough about it. There's no hidden secrets going on in the Federal Reserve to my knowledge. And I tell people, you know, we've got 12 Federal Reserve banks. You find out which district you're in, call them up and go from there. We don't need to waste money with another commission or an audit that's not necessary. Because, folks, we got a lot of other problems we need to worry about. You're listening to the Neil Bortz Show, and this is Herman Cain.
Since the Federal Reserve is the engine of inflation, creates the business cycle, produces our recessions and our depressions, the Federal Reserve obviously is a very important issue. And fortunately tonight we have a former director of the Federal Reserve at Kansas City. So I have a question for Mr. Cain. Mr. Cain, in the past you've been rather critical of any of us who would want to audit the Fed. You said you've used pretty strong terms that we were ignorant and that we didn't know what we were doing, and therefore there was no need for a Fed audit anyway, because if you had one you're not going to find out everything because everybody knows everything about the Fed. But now that we have found and we've gotten an audit, we have found out an awful lot on how special businesses get, you know, bailed out. Wall Street, the banks, and special companies, foreign governments. And you said that you advised those of us who were concerned and you belittled, you say, call up the Federal Reserve and just ask them to get a PR person. So do you still stick by this, that this is frivolous, or do you think it's very important? 64% of the American people want a full audit of the Fed on a regular basis.
Mr. Cain, first of all, you have misquoted me. I did not call you or any of your people ignorant. I don't know where that came from.
I'll get it for you.
All right? Now, so you got to be careful of the stuff that you get off the internet, because that's just not something that I have said. Secondly, when I served on the board of the Federal Reserve in the 1990s, we didn't do any of the things that this Federal Reserve is doing. I don't agree with the actions of this Federal Reserve. I don't agree with the actions that have been undertaken by Ben Bernanke. We didn't have a $14 trillion national debt to prop up with some of the actions that they're taking. And I have also said, to be precise, I do not object to the Federal Reserve being audited. I simply said, if someone wants to initiate that action, go right ahead. It doesn't bother me. So I've been misrepresented in that regard. I don't have a problem with the Federal Reserve being audited. It's simply not my top priority. My top priority is 999.
Bernanke has in secret spent hundreds of billions of dollars bailing out one group and not bailing out another group. I don't see anybody in the news media demanding the kind of transparency at the Fed that you would demand of every other aspect of the federal government. And I think it is corrupt and it is wrong for one man to have that kind of secret power.
So Congressman Paul, where do you come down on this?
One thing I might say that we have made some inroads on the Federal Reserve. We passed a bill last year. We got a partial, audit of the Fed, and we've learned a whole lot. They were dealing in $15 trillion. $5 trillion went overseas to bail out foreign banks. But you know what? Congress did a lot. I've worked on it for a good many years. But Bloomberg helped and Fox helped. They had court cases, Freedom of Information Act. And there are some even at this table who didn't think auditing the Fed was such a good idea, that we could call up the Fed and ask them, and they would tell us what they're doing. I've been calling them up for 30 years and they never tell me. But we're getting to the bottom of it. But if you want to understand why we have a problem, you have to understand the Fed, because the cause comes from the business cycle. We shouldn't be asking saying what to do exactly with the recession. Obviously, we have to deal with that, but you can't solve, you can't cure the disease if you don't know the cause of it. And the cause is the booms. When there are booms, and they're artificial, whether it's the CRA or whether it's the Fed easy credit, when you have bubbles, whether it's the NASDAQ or whether it's the housing bubbles, they burst. And when they do, you have to have corrections, and that's what we're dealing with. And we can do this by building coalitions and not sacrificing any principle.
Let me go to housing. What would you do? Would you get the federal government out of housing? Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no need to. Look at
no Freddie Mac, no Fannie Mae, nothing.
That's where the distortions come. That's where the moral hazard comes from. That's where the malinvestment, overbuild. It was predictable. You talked about what economists we should look to, and unfortunately, we've been living with Keynesian economics for many, many decades, and everybody who was right about predicting the bubbles were Austrian economists. They said they were coming. And yet, they're also saying, and I agree with them, that everything that we're doing right now is wrong. So what we did with the housing bubble, yes, we had too many houses. It was glaring in our face. The bubble was doomed to burst, and it came because of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, easy credit, and also Community Reinvestment Act. So who got into trouble? The people who did the speculating, the Wall Street, the derivatives market. They got the bailout. They got privileges. So what happened to the middle class? They lost their jobs. They lost their houses. This whole system is all messed up. And what I hear here is just tinkering with the current system and not looking at something new and different. And it's a free market economy without a Federal Reserve System, with sound money. If you don't have that, you're going to continue with the bubble. And this propping up this debt and keeping the correction. You need the correction. You need to get rid of the malinvestment and the debt. The debt is the burden on the economy.
It's called the 9-9-9 plan. It imposes a 9% business tax, flat tax, a 9% personal flat tax, and a 9% national sales tax.
I said we would get back. Mr. Cain, you say that your plan is revenue neutral, and last year the U.S. collected $2.2 trillion in tax revenue, but Bloomberg government has run the numbers, and your plan would have raised no more than $2 trillion. And even with that shortfall, you'd still be slapping a 9% sales tax on food and medicine.
The problem with that analysis is that it is incorrect. The reason it's incorrect is because they start with assumptions that we don't make. Remember, 999 plan throws out the current tax code, and it starts with 3 simple economic driving principles. Production drives the economy, risk-taking drives growth, and we need sound money. Measurements must be dependable. Now, what 999 does, it expands the base. When you expand the base, we can arrive at the lowest possible rate, which is 999. The difference between the 999 plan and the other plans that are being proposed is that they pivot off of the existing tax code. We've had an outside firm, independent firm, dynamically score it, and so our numbers will make it revenue neutral. All right.
But then
Karen,
explain why, under your plan, all Americans should be paying more for milk, for a loaf of bread, and beer.
And pizza. I don't buy beer. You have to start with the biggest tax that a lot of Americans pay, which is the payroll tax, 15.3%. That goes to 9%. That's a 6 percentage point difference, and the prices will not go up. So they've got a 6 percentage point difference to apply to the national sales tax piece of that, and in doing so, they have the flexibility to decide on how much they want to spend it on new goods, how much they want to spend it on used goods, because there's no tax on used goods.
But Congresswoman Bachmann, you're a former IRS lawyer. Do you agree?
I would have to say that the 999 plan isn't a jobs plan, it is a tax plan. And I would say that from my experience being in Congress, but also as a federal tax lawyer, The last thing you would do is give Congress another pipeline of a revenue stream, and this gives Congress a pipeline in a sales tax. A sales tax can also lead to a value-added tax. The United States Congress put into place the Spanish-American War tax in 1898. We only partially repealed that in 2006. So once you get a new revenue stream, you're never going to get rid of it. And one thing I would say is, when you take the 999 plan and you turn it upside down, I think the devil's in the details.
Break down Lord Cain for us.
Look, as a politician, he's being sold as another phony outsider independent. Not true. He owes his whole career to the Skull and Bones Pillsbury cartel family, and that's not an independent business. That destroys independent business, contributes to bad health and all the rest of it.
And Pillsbury is total pimp level. They're right at the top.
But remember, in 2008 presidential race, John McCain didn't have a pulse. He didn't even show up in the polls until Giuliani dropped out. Then suddenly he rose to prominence. They have these people waiting in the wings. Palin's waiting in the wings. People like Herman Cain are waiting in the wings if they can't sell Perry and the rest of them. Now, Herman Cain himself started at the Department of the Navy, then worked for the...
By the way, that's where they get their top minions, is out of the Navy, and they sheep dip them into intelligence from that. That's a big point right there.
That's right. Then he worked for the Coca-Cola Company as a business analyst.
Totally selected.
Then, starting in 1977, he joined Pillsbury, rising to vice president in the early 80s. Then they moved him to Burger King, a Pillsbury subsidiary. That's healthy for black people. Then, well, everyone, of course, but I mean, you know the perception. Then he became CEO of Godfather's Pizza, also a Pillsbury company. Then Pillsbury sold off their interest. There was mergers. There's inside baseball on that. The point is, he rose to business prominence through the Pillsbury cartel, who are established founding members of the Skull and Bones.
No, in our research, they're right up there at the top. Now, getting to the big point, though. He wasn't just on the board of a regional Fed. He was the director. Tell him that.
Yeah, first he was deputy director, then he was actual director for a total of 5 years, while he was simultaneously still Godfather Pizza CEO. So that's independent business for you, working for the Federal Reserve.
And again, tell him what branch he was the head of.
Yeah, at Kansas City. And you heard in the clip where he says, just call them up, go down there, ask them what they're doing. They almost had me arrested for filming, not even on their property, from, you know, like you say, 100 yards away. Pillsbury, their most important director who managed their business, Frederick T. Gates, he went on from Pillsbury to lead the Rockefeller Foundation and make them the monster they were, with all the education interest and the rest.
Pillsbury's right at the top.
Yeah, and they're totally 100% in bed with the Skull and Bones. There's all kinds of important politicians who branch out from their family line. It's a total cartel, Alex. And Herman Cain represents them. That's how he rose to prominence.
Well, what about the fact that he wants us to have a sales tax? He's like, we've got to pay our debts. I mean, we've got to pull up those clips. We don't owe this stuff, Herman Cain. He's a Federal Reserve pimp in there, just like all of these mainline Republicans. He is in there wanting us to go, okay, more taxes so they can give it to themselves in banker bailouts. And he's like, just call them up. They'll tell you everything.
And you've heard him in the debates and in other statements. He's pro-torture. They asked him, would he end the wars? Would he bring the troops home? Well, I can't answer that, but I would listen to the advisors. In other words, the same Council on Foreign Relations advisors that he already serves. The same circle.
I mean, he's horrible. He's absolutely horrible.
He's just another puppet waiting in the wings.
You know, I take it back. I say he's not as bad as a Mitt Romney who supports carbon taxes and gun grabs and wrote the Obama thing. They're all the same.
It's an empty suit. They'll rotate in whoever they could sell. If they can't sell Perry, which they've already failed on, they can't sell Romney. They have Cain, Palin, others as well. So,
but there's one guy, though, they say we can't have. He can't win.
No, he can't win.
He's the guy that wants to get rid of the place Herman Cain was the boss of.
He can't win because the Federal Reserve parasite's sucking everything out. That's obviously probably the #1 issue.
Ron Paul's the only one that will actually point at the giant goblin in the room.
Yeah, and then I believe 2 debates back, they asked the question about the Federal Reserve. They asked everyone except Ron Paul what they would do to abolish the Fed.
Well, look, we got to get busy exposing Herman Cain. We got to get busy exposing his stupid fair tax garbage. And people are like, "What, you like the income tax?" No. Get rid of it and nothing new. We got all these other taxes on top of it. Heard of tariffs? China's got them doing pretty good, aren't you? aren't they?
But the worst thing is they're selling him as an independent alternative just because he hasn't been in political puppet office yet. And
they're a bunch of, he's been in the real office of the real government. The ones that hijack is the private Federal Reserve. Good job, Aaron. We'll be back. Stay with us. Richard Reeves.